Shortly after surviving an audacious Jedi coup attempt in his own Chancellor's office, Sheev Palpatine braved the holocams and addressed the entire galaxy. He bared the gruesome scars of the Jedi's attempt on his life for all to see and vowed to crush the Jedi Rebellion. But the most important part of his speech he saved for last.
In order to ensure the security and continuing stability, the Republic will be reorganized into the first galactic empire for a safe and secure society.
This would be the first of many attempts by Palpatine to discredit everything the Galactic Republic stood for. From the Jedi, to the Senate, to the very grand army of the Republic that won the war against the Separatists in the first place. You see, Palpatine was a master politician, an even better gamesman. He understood that even though he defeated the Jedi by making them not alive, his position was still precarious. He had inherited an empire that was heavily weighed down by debt from military spending, and also a great portion of the Outer Rim and Mid-Rim was in complete ruins. Even in the core, you had stagnation and recession in many worlds. And then finally, Palpatine's mandate to rule wasn't exactly all that solid. There were still plenty of Republic loyalists who understood that Palpatine had been Sorry about the explosions, there's fireworks because apparently some yokel flew an X-Wing into a battle station and destroyed it. Everyone's celebrating. But anyway, a lot of people understood what Palpatine was doing. He was eroding the institutions that protected the Republic's democracies, like eliminating term limits, and that is ultimately why they opposed him. The Empire might not have been a representative democracy, but Emperor Palpatine still had to have public support on his side, or else, well, the Galactic Civil War would happen. And so the creation of the Empire had to be slick, and there needed to be a real visible change that the average Imperial citizen could notice and appreciate. Because one of the most important things about governance is actually showing the citizens what you're doing so they can visibly see your policies at work. I mean, sure, the new Imperial-class Star Destroyer wasn't really suited for the tasks of peacekeeping, but a good percentage of Imperials, mostly dudes, saw that massive ship, loved it, and suddenly believed that Palpatine was the right man for the job. Because knowing that your side has a huge fleet of new Star Destroyers makes falling asleep at night that much easier. And that was pretty much the Imperial military's design philosophy. Make it large, make it powerful, and make it really scary looking. Forget about all that cost-benefit analysis. That's for nerds.
I'm a nerd.
And so there's actually very little lineage between Galactic Republic military designs and Imperial military designs. Aside from the aesthetics, that is. And that is more apparent than ever when you take a look at the Imperial military's Walker design versus the Republic's. A quick shout out to our viewer, Zeratul, for the episode idea. Thanks. Remember guys, I don't always read all of your comments, but when I do, I'm usually not wearing pants. So let's take a look at the main walker used by the Galactic Republic. The Rothana Heavy Engineering All-Terrain Tactical Enforcer. First of all, I really love the name Tactical Enforcer. It sounds like what Arnold calls his pecs, you know? But it's also a great description for what this vehicle can actually do. See, the ATTE wasn't a main battle tank. It was actually more like an infantry fighting vehicle. Sure, it had a large mass driver cannon on top of it. It was basically a railgun that could fire a variety of different types of rounds. But as you can see, the gunner sits in a very exposed seat without any armor around it. It almost reminds me of those old World War II era tank destroyers with the open top. These tank destroyers had less armor because of cost-saving measures, and it also lightened the load of the vehicle significantly. And so this design choice on the ATTE tells us that this vehicle, oh my god, is not really supposed to be used for the vanguard of an assault. Instead, it's really for a supporting role. A direct hit from a Separatist anti-tank missile would not be survivable in this walker, but the ATTE could survive a few hits from a Separatist hover tank's main cannon and still keep the crew alive. Upon further inspection, the walker has an additional 6 anti-personnel and light vehicle blaster cannons, which are terrific at suppressing enemy positions. Along with its pilot, spotter, and 5 gunners, the ATTE could also carry a full platoon of clone troopers into battle. When operating in dangerously confined areas with limited line of sight, the clone troopers could dismount and then basically screen the area for separatist droid ambushes. And when a clone unit is pinned down by an enemy tank or heavy weapons fire, the ATTE's mass driver cannon can come to the rescue. This symbiotic relationship between man and machine is what we like to call mechanized infantry, and it's absolutely beautiful. All of the flexibility, awareness, and ingenuity of a ground pounder mixed with the protection, firepower, and mobility of an armored vehicle. The ATTE wasn't just mobile though, it was actually relatively fast. It could walk, or I guess run, at up to 60 kilometers per hour. For our American viewers, that's roughly the max speed you want to be going in your pickup truck while firing your handgun out the window. That is, of course, if you are an individual who is concerned about firearm safety. So the ATTE is surprisingly nimble. I mean, if you think about it, Usain Bolt can only run at around 44 kilometers per hour, which for our American viewers is the max speed you want to be riding your bike at when firing a handgun. And the ATTE could basically go anywhere thanks to a series of very smart design choices. It had a pressurized hull, so vacuum and underwater were not off limits. The ATTE's metal feet were magnetized, which meant that it could latch onto the hull of a starship or asteroid, or even climb vertical cliff faces. And when the ATTE was going vertical, it wasn't really a big problem for the people inside because there was actually an inertial dampener system built into the ATTE, which is kind of overkill. This was the device that made sure young Anakin Skywalker didn't turn into meat paste when he was doing those spins he really likes to do. This device basically negated G-forces on starships by creating an artificial gravity bubble. The ATTE, when paired with a LAAT carrier variant, could basically fly to anywhere on the battlefield, or even into space. You could also store a pair of ATRTs on board for reconnaissance work, or if you want to do an old-fashioned cavalry attack. So basically, the ATTE turned a standard clone trooper platoon into a very versatile Swiss Army knife type of element. Fighting in open fields and under heavy enemy fire, well, you can dismount your scout troopers and deploy a bunch of fast-moving ATRTs. Fighting in cities, well, you can dismount your troopers and go house to house while your ATTE provides direct fire support and maybe makes new pathways in the city for your troops. There's really nothing a mechanized clone trooper couldn't do, and that made him the perfect soldier for a galaxy-wide war that took place in all sorts of different environments, biomes, and against different types of enemy forces. The all-terrain armored transport, believe it or not, was created during the Galactic Republic period by Quad Drive Yards, the parent company of Rothana Heavy Engineering. Even though its design preceded the infamous Tarkin Doctrine, it actually fit in very well with that mentality. This massive walker towered over the battlefield at around 22 meters in height, or just short of a 7-story building. It could be seen from afar, even in the confines of an urban setting, and it struck fear into the hearts of disorganized rebels. The key word here is disorganized. Now, the ATTE would be selected to replace the ATTE, which it served alongside in a supporting role during the Clone Wars. The reasoning here is not really clear. I mean, it's kind of stupid to make an infantry fighting vehicle that's 7 stories tall, after all. It makes it extremely difficult to disembark. It could be even dangerous. You guys remember what happened with Private Blackburn during the Battle of Mogadishu? Well, to get out of an ATAT, you're either rappelling out or waiting for the ATAT to kneel down like a big dog, so that the stormtroopers don't succumb to gravity. In some Imperial military papers, the ATTE was criticized for having a relatively weak belly armor, which made it susceptible to landmines. And supposedly, the ATAT's 22-meter height was supposed to fix that problem. But then again, are landmines really the biggest danger, or, I don't know, anti-tank missiles? More dangerous? I think the latter definitely poses a much bigger danger to the crew. Now, having said that, the ATAT is an incredibly armored and strong vehicle. We've actually seen an old clone ATTE go head-to-head with an ATAT, and while it took a lot of damage from the ATAT's chin-mounted heavy laser cannon, the mass driver on the ATTE couldn't really penetrate the armor of the larger walker. During the Battle of Scarif, we witnessed an all-terrain armored cargo transport walker take a direct hit to the cockpit from an HH-12 rocket launcher. The AT-ACT isn't even rated for frontline action like the AT-AT. And so clearly this AT-AT is a lot tougher of a vehicle than the ATTE. Another supposed weakness that Imperial designers saw in the ATTE was its inability to overcome large obstacles, which is strange because I definitely saw an ATTE climb up a vertical cliff wall during the Battle of Teth. Something that an AT-AT clearly would never be able to do. I mean, I guess the only advantage it has is if it needs to scale over, I don't know, like a 16-meter wall, it might be able to do that faster. The ATTE also wasn't nearly as mobile as the ATTE. It still could be lifted into battle, but it required a much larger Gazanti-class light cruiser to move it around, and this vessel was a lot slower and an easier target for AA guns. Although the larger Gazanti-class cruiser could usually carry 2 ATATs compared to the LAAT's 1 ATTE. That's a lot of acronyms, guys. I'm sorry. Now, the ATAT could carry around twice as many combat soldiers as an ATTE, but the vehicle is actually driven and usually commanded by Imperial Army soldiers and officers. And it's not all that different from the Navy and Coast Guard soldiers who ferried Army infantry onto the beaches in Normandy. An ATTE was crewed and commanded by a clone officer who usually was also in charge of the platoon on board. Clones were far better trained and had a lot more cross-training. And I can actually see a situation when an Army ATAT driver is bickering with the platoon leader from the stormtroopers on board, and that could probably cause some problems in the middle of a very hectic battle. Army commanders also like placing the ATAT in the front in the middle of a formation for not only intimidation purposes, but because the ATAT's most valuable asset is its ability to serve as a mobile forward observation outpost. We saw how during the Battle of Hoth, the ATATs attracted most of the attention from the rebel fighters. What we don't see were the other more conventional assault vehicles and speeders being used by Imperial snowtroopers. So yeah, in a way, the ATAT serves as a very expensive distraction. And even though it could handle most incoming rounds, against a starfighter, it was definitely very vulnerable. Also, the amount of engineering they had to do to make sure that this thing didn't tip over meant that it was not the most stable vehicle in the world. All you really needed as a rebel was a speeder and a tow cable, and then this happens. When the aforementioned clones in the ATTE first saw the ATAT, they were surprised at how ungainly the vehicle looked. Also, the weakest parts of an ATAT are the belly armor and the knee joints, which consequently are also the easiest for ground troops to target because of the large blind spot that existed there. And so while an ATAT might be able to take out an ATTE in direct combat, it was just way too ungainly and awkward of a vehicle to be useful in most combat situations. I guess as an observation post it is kind of useful, but against a near pure type of military force, it will only take a few moments for them to use heavy munitions to destroy it. Once again, the Imperial ATAT is more form over function when compared to the venerable and reliable ATTE. Although if you ask me, I'll take a repulsor lift vehicle or even a track vehicle over a walker, but that's just personal preference. So there you have it, guys. That is my analysis of these two walkers. Let me know in the comment section below what you think. Also, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy,